Mark Slade accurately reminded us yesterday that for the bulk of the runners, below about 8th or 10th place, the sprint race is really about gaining more information for qualifying proper and then the race on Sunday, because there's only that one session, free practice one, on Friday morning in which they can do any sort of sorting out of the cars. We talked about that yesterday. Anyway, we went into the sprint race today and not much was learnt for a lot of the teams. Both McLarens out at the first corner. Zach's master plan, please advise. Actually, I don't think you can blame Zach too much for this one, because in reality, it was a function of the nature of the circuit. There's two hairpins on the Kota track. They've both got pretty wide entries, and they both obviously filter down to some sort of apex. And on lap one, first corner, it was no surprise to see Fernando Alonso going down the inside from his excellent P6 for Aston Martin yesterday, down the inside of Nico Hülkenberg, who sort of saw him and gave him a bit of room. But then simultaneously, on the outside of Nico, you've got the two McLarens, and this is a little bit of the master plan thing. I think they're both sort of dancing around, wondering what the other's going to do next. Oscar makes a very good start from the clean side of the grid from P3. Lando makes a good start too from the dirty side of the grid in P2, front row effectively alongside Max, but 8 meters behind him. Max makes a great start and he's not even involved in any of this. Lando's going down the inside from his grid position. Oscar's on the outside, kind of wondering what to do next. And the obvious move is to let Lando go in as normal and then do an up and under down the inside of Lando and try to get him on exit. I suppose that's the only area where you would say the master plan isn't going according to plan, because if this was a perfectly tranquil McLaren team with everybody doing exactly what they need to do and the two drivers minimizing any possibility of running into one another, which I guess is their directive, then Oscar may not have thought about that up and under at the first corner, because it's always slightly risky. You don't really know what's going on behind you. And as he went down the inside to get the inside run on Lando out of the corner, and I think he would have got him. Actually, he had the momentum and he had the traction, he had the track position. It was exactly the moment when Fernando was going down the inside of Nico Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg gave Fernando a little bit of room. Fernando was going a little bit too quickly. They touched, and then Hülkenberg went into Oscar Piastri, who then went into Lando Norris, and both McLarens were out. So yeah, first corner, sprint race shouldn't happen. Two guys shouldn't run into one another. McLaren learning nothing in the sprint race. That's probably more important than the points lost at this stage, certainly from the point of view of the two drivers. And from Oscar Piastri's point of view, no real damage done, because he's ahead of Lando in the championship anyway by a relatively comfortable margin. For Lando, it was not good, obviously. Qualified ahead of Oscar, and he's out at the first corner. The interesting thing then was that the top brass at McLaren, including Zach, then stayed on the pit wall and watched the entire race from the pit wall, presumably doing emails, I don't know, watching the football or something, I don't know. But anyway, McLaren out of it, which left Max Verstappen and George Russell, who'd scythed through the field from the outside. Lots of scything going on. Charles Leclerc doing a very good job too, just missing Nico Hülkenberg's car on the left on acceleration, and Lewis Hamilton, who'd gone wide on the right to avoid it all, came down the middle and got the position from Lewis. He's up to P4. Carlos Sainz too, very good job to get up to P3. But it was going to be George Russell again to put pressure on Max Verstappen. They duly did 3 or 4 laps behind the safety car. And when it restarted, Max, at the end of that first lap, that first racing lap with all the debris everywhere, was well over, it was around 2 seconds ahead of George. But of course, all that went with the safety car deployment. And when it restarted, George was in good shape. Interestingly, as predicted by Mark, George and the Ferrari started on the used mediums, because they used that one set at the back end of FP1 instead of going out on soft. So they were on used tyres, Max was on new tyres. In theory, Max still had the big advantage. But for some reason, when the race restarted, from having been behind the safety car with the tyres having lost temperature, George had more temperature in the tyres. The Mercedes was a quicker car, and he was right on Max. And as soon as DRS was allowed, it worked for George. And here we saw again one of my main criticisms of DRS. George had the DRS run on Max. We're talking about lap 9 now. And it's almost as if George doesn't know what to do with this unbelievable speed advantage he suddenly has going into turn 12, the left-hander at the end of the straight. But of course, he can't come off the throttle, he can't brake early, he brakes late and goes down the inside of Max, but then has no grip mid-corner and just runs wide. And Max on the outside runs wide as well, avoiding the collision. Again, if George had done a natural toe, he wouldn't have found himself in that position, and he might indeed have made a pass. But much more importantly, I think, on that incident, it was a reminder again. We talked yesterday about how good Max was on very, very fast corners, entry to fast corners. This is another reminder of how good Max is in traffic as well, because he had sized up that situation, presumably just looking in his mirrors, feeling what George was going to do. He knew he was in DRS. He saw the Mercedes down inside him, and then instinctively left himself enough margin to be able to move the steering to the right if he needed to avoid George. Very easy for those two to have had a shunt and George to have taken Max out. But Max ran wide immediately. Before that, I should say the other point is that Max, through all of this, braking absolutely as late as he possibly could. And that was one of the problems for George. If Max had braked slightly earlier because he was just trying to protect the lead or whatever it was, George probably would have got him then and would have run a bit wide and probably would have got the lead. But Max absolutely pin sharp on his braking. So George had no alternative then to brake really late, and really that's what happened, and ran wide. Interestingly, and I'm still confused by this, there was no penalty at all for George, because had they touched, he would have caused an avoidable collision, and yet nothing happened. They both ran wide thanks to the reaction of Max, and they just rejoined. And after that, it appeared as if being on the scrub tyre then did have its penalty, and Max was gradually able to pull away from George, who nonetheless finished second for Mercedes. So good result for him on the day. A surprising result for him, having qualified P5. After that, it was Max in control, although on the radio he's saying he didn't like the feel of the back end of the car. This was a good test for Red Bull. They got that information and they're able to react to that now with the setup they will have going into qualifying and the race, whereas McLaren will have no information at all, obvious point. But that is part of what the sprint is all about, is getting that sort of information. So a double whammy win for Max and Red Bull in effect against McLaren, nominated by Max after the race, quite logically is still his nearest opposition. Carlos Sainz, very good job from the position in which he found himself to finish third. And I say that because he beat the Ferraris again, a bit like Baku. It wasn't just the drive in isolation of Carlos Sainz showing his skill and his polish and his ability to bring a car home and the groove in which he finds himself in a race or gets himself in a race. It was that he beat the Ferraris. Lewis Hamilton looking pretty good, got past Charles when Charles made a mistake going through the fast S's, ran wide, and Lewis got the momentum on him going down into the hairpin and coming out of the hairpin with the DRS and got him down the inside. Quite a forceful move by Lewis. It was sort of one of these and don't even try to come back at me, Charles. But then he couldn't do anything about Carlos Sainz. So as good as Lewis's drive was, and as aggressive as it was relative to Charles Leclerc, Ferrari could not beat a Williams Mercedes around Austin, and that was a bit of a shock, admittedly on scrub tyres as well. But having said that, this is Ferrari, and again, it was Carlos Sainz, the driver they fired, beating Lewis Hamilton, the driver that replaced him. So very good result for Carlos. Good result for Lewis, though, relative to his intra-team politics alongside Charles. And then came Alex Albon in the other Williams, and Yuki Tsunoda, who finished seventh, also did a very good job amidst the debris in turn one, went down the inside, went over quite a lot of it, but managed to come out unscathed. So a half reasonable drive for Yuki finally in Red Bull. Kimi Antonelli had a big battle with Oliver Behrman, who drove really well, I think, in the Haas Ferrari. Bear in mind, he's in a Haas Ferrari and he's holding off Kimi Antonelli, the superstar of the future in the factory Mercedes. Did a good job, but eventually was given a 10-second penalty, a bit over the top, I think, for what he did. But he just ran a little bit wide coming out of the hairpin when Antonelli was right on him and kept position, and as a result was given a 10-second penalty. So he lost his points. Liam Lawson 9th, Pierre Gasly 10th, but Kimi Antonelli, of course, in P8, taking the final point for the sprint. The race finished under the yellow. Please advise again, Lance Stroll, what are you thinking? He's had his fair share of incidents in Austin, and on this occasion, just going around getting tyre knowledge for the team, chassis knowledge, whatever it is, he basically just went down the inside of Esteban Ocon and drove into him and both of them out of the race, as a result of which the race finished under the yellow, with Max cruising around to win the sprint race from the pole. A well-earned pole, you got to say, in the context of what happened, because the place you wanted to be with all that was going to happen going into turn one was on the pole, with all of it happening behind you. And you could say if Lando had qualified on the pole, which really he should have in a car that good, in a McLaren that good, had he been a little bit quicker through 3, 4 and 5, perhaps not made a couple of errors somewhere else, he would have been on the pole and he would have avoided all that and he would have won the sprint race, and it would be giving him more momentum going into qualifying and the race. Well, I say he would have won the sprint race. Max might well have been second and he might have beaten him, but nonetheless he would have been away from all the crud. But he wasn't, and he was right in the midst of it with Oscar around him and Fernando there and all sorts of things going on. So yeah, a messy day for McLaren. The messiest day of the year so far. They will say it's only the sprint race, but the biggest problem will be the lack of information, lack of knowledge, the lack versus the amount of information and the amount of knowledge that Red Bull got for Max Verstappen. That was the sprint race. We'll be back again with another video after qualifying. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and to REC Watches. See you soon.